Welcome to the Legendarium Green Team. I'm your host, Kyptan, and joining me today are Hurinfan,
Hola.
Ashaman,
Hello.
and Dusty Wheel.
Howdy.
Today we're here to talk about Hyperion by Dan Simmons, winner of the 1990 Hugo and Locus Awards for Best Novel, and one of my personal favorites of all time. This episode will be spoiler-free to start, but we'll warn you when we're about to dive into spoiler territory. We might spoil a few things about the basic structure of the novel, so if you want to go in completely blind, stop listening now. Okay, let's get down to business. I have a couple of questions to start things off before we go to a more free-form general impression section.
I like questions.
Hyperion is famously known as the Canterbury Tales in space, with each chapter containing a backstory tale from one of the pilgrims. Do you think this conceit strengthens or weakens the books? Did you enjoy it?
Yes. Yeah. I feel like the structure of the book is something that is relatively unique in fantasy, and it works very well
Fantasy?
for like books. all literature. I
Ready
can't
to get into that discussion already?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, well, that's right. It is science fantasy after all.
There you go.
Maybe
There
a
you
little bit
go.
of science fiction.
A little bit.
A little bit.
I'll save that for next question.
Yeah, it's a fairly unique thing. It works very well for what Dan Simmons is trying to do, and he knows when not to do it as well, which I think is great.
I enjoy the structure because it makes me feel literate and important and like I understand what's happening. But mostly it's just allusions to things that like I think, oh, I should probably read that someday. That'll make me look smart.
Have you read the Canterbury Tales?
I've never read the Canterbury Tales, yeah. I
Oh,
wanted to
okay.
read it before this podcast, but yeah, I didn't get to it.
I've read the functional equivalent in Hyperion. Like, why would I need to read the Hyperion?
Yeah.
Because I have this modern retelling.
There's some great stories in the Canterbury Tales,
Yeah, probably.
including some very saucy ones.
Yeah, I haven't actually read all of them, but I think I read, what's the name of, all I remember from high school is the big lady that talks about the saucy tales or whatever.
The Miller's Wife.
The Miller's Wife. There we go. So yes.
Oh, I think I might have read a story or two as well in high school.
Yep.
I remember nothing.
So
That actually sort of makes sense because maybe the sauciest tale is told by a bigger woman.
I mean, is it?
Is it the sauciest? I think it's the sauciest.
I don't know if it's the sauciest.
Maybe the sauciest is story number 2.
That's what I was kind of
In
thinking.
Hyperion?
In Hyperion. I think
Definitely the second one. Tons
Yeah,
of
that
real
one.
violence.
I don't know.
I was gonna say the third, because we got the Poet's Tale.
Okay, I don't count bestiality.
Yeah, this is his own thing. I understand where you're coming from, but definitely his own life.
Nah, that was most of that stuff was just behind the scenes, whereas in the second tale it was front and center.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of liked it. So I jump back to the structure. I really love
Thank
that.
you.
You're welcome, I guess. I just wanted to answer the question. No. Yeah, I think that it gives different prose styles his like ability to kind of shine when he writes in those different ways, and then having the perspectives from different characters, And I really think that the best part is you can read one character's story and be like, yeah, this is interesting, I liked it, and then the next one be like, oh, okay, this is what I'm here for. And then that also bleeds into the parts where they're not telling stories. Then you're like, I like that character because the story that they told.
Mm-hmm. He does a lot of genre blending in this. It's really well done. I like especially the horror aspects.
I really liked the epistolary nature of the first tale and how it's at sharp contrast with the more oratorical style of the third tale.
Epistolary, oratorical.
Yeah,
You're really
Now who's
elevating
looking
the
smart
dialogue
now?
yeah.
Oh yeah, and it works for the style too. The first one's the horror tale, I suppose, the most horror at least, and it has an and so in that way maybe it's channeling Dracula.
I think it very much is.
Very much is.
Mm-hmm.
Complete with all the body horror.
Oh,
Now I need to read Dracula.
Dracula's good. I read it last year.
Oh, and a little tinge of homoeroticism. Did anyone else get that?
Yeah,
A
little bit, yeah.
I caught it
Yes.
this time around specifically because I wonder what Kip's going to be talking about. And I'm like, oh, he's going to be bringing up this.
You talk about the Father Duray and his guy that we never see.
his dear Edward.
Yeah,
That's what it
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
It had never registered to me on previous reads. This is the effect that Kyptan has on you and your.
you got gay on the brain.
Yeah.
Look, sometimes you just see the things that are right in front of your face, and I can't help it if I help you with that.
Most of the time, I don't see them.
How many times have you
Okay.
guys read this?
This is only my second.
This is probably like my 7th reread.
2.5.
Okay.
I'm the guy that didn't notice the homo overtones of Hannibal, so I'm a bit dense.
You're just not looking for it. You need to spend more time with me, I guess. Let's move on to our next question before we go into our more general impressions. So Hyperion is a series that rarely stops to explain jargon to the readers before using it. So you have terms like TC2, time debt, comlog, skimmer,
Corn log.
farcaster, world corn log. Yeah. World web, hegemony. How did you cope with that? And were there any favorite neologisms that you found or discovered?
I really like time debt. Time debt, I think I completely misinterpreted it on my first read because I was a stupid like 9th grader, and I was like, "Why do they have to pay off a debt for traveling through space?" Like maybe at the end it clicked for me, but yeah, it's a really compelling concept, I think, and serves to set up a lot of the tension I think that exists in the Hyperion universe very well.
What I like about all of the jargon words in this story, except for corn log, is that they all make sense if you just give 1 second to think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
TC2 was the hardest for me.
Sorry, I was going to say TC2 and tree ships as well. Because when I heard tree ships, I didn't imagine like exactly what it is, if that makes sense. Because like it's a bit too on the nose.
Yeah.
It's like a tree ship. How should I? What is like branching out?
I mean, I will say that the tree ship is one of my favorite ideas from these novels.
It's really
The art's really cool too.
It is really neat. Yeah.
Like you hear Technicore, you're like, okay, I get it, right? You hear some of the other ones that I can't bring the thing up right now. They make sense.
Farcaster.
Farcaster, yeah.
Fat line.
Yep. Fat line they do explain a little bit when they first
Yeah, they
introduce
do.
it.
Yeah.
Because that's like the prologue.
Yes. Yes.
Probably the one besides time debt that I misunderstood the most until it was like actually explained was all thing. I had no idea what that was.
Well, because there's 2 different things too. Like there's the all thing and the techno core that are similar sometimes, but not. And like when I first read this the first time, I didn't understand the distinction, and it took me a while.
All thing and data sphere are 2 separate things as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
They have a very complicated governmental structure.
It's supposed to be that way.
And technological backbone that undergirds it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wonder if they're going to come up later.
So I always think it's interesting. Yeah. With stuff like this, though, the jargon. So one thing is that some of the jargon that they use, it's like just everyday items. Like hegemony is literally just using the term that in the dictionary to apply to like the overall structure of the government.
I know what you're saying, but hegemony is not an everyday word.
Okay, fair. I studied international studies, and we talked about hegemony like year 1. So I was like, oh yeah, hegemony. I get this. So for me, I read that and was like, oh yeah, whatever, it's hegemony.
I know it from
like,
Ender's Universe, so.
Ender's Game. Yeah.
So yes. Well, that's the other thing. A lot of these technological jargon, it gets recycled through a lot of sci-fi. So like once you've read this and then you've read some more stuff, pretty soon you read the next book and you're like, oh, okay, they said fat line. I know what that is. Done.
Mm-hmm.
So
Fat line, Ansible, same thing.
yes.
They're really good at giving you like an impression of what something is, especially the technology jargon. It gives you an idea of what it is and how it works, but Dan Simmons obviously doesn't need to come up with the actual technology behind it, like a Hawking drive.
Yeah, no.
Right.
And that way it's more fantasy-y.
All we need to know is that it's something that lets FTL travel happen. Or not quite FTL, but effectively.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly equivalent to light speed travel. So you guys all had a pretty easy time coming to grips with the jargon, is what I'm hearing?
Yep.
Not the first time, but I'm less stupid now.
I was older then Ashaman was stupid. So my first time, I had no problem either.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly. I don't think that I paid as much attention to the jargon and more the stories, so I wasn't really worried about it. That's how I read books. It's like with Malazan, I just jumped in. People are like, "Oh, you'll be so confused," but I was like, "Who cares?" I just read, and eventually I know what's happening.
So what I'm hearing is you're not a standard audience. Okay.
I'm not oops.
It's a good attitude.
Wait, how did I end up with Malazan guys? All Malazan guys on here.
Because
We've all read it. You've read it too.
Literary fiction.
I'm not in the podcast, just reading it.
Okay. So other general impressions. Now here's the freeform stuff before we go into spoilers. How did you feel about these books? What would you rate like this first half? Is it leading towards something you think might be great, might be good? How's it been? Even if the second half is trash, is this first half worth reading?
Yes, it is worth reading. And when I first read this, I got a sense of it leading towards greatness, especially because of the first story, which that one really sticks with you. And I would say that even if this is all we got, it'd probably be worth reading still. Although I think there is a lot to like about what comes after as well.
I agree. I find it hard to believe that anybody would read all three of these stories and not like at least one of them. And like not at least like really, really enjoy one of them, right? They're all very, very different. They're written very, very differently. And maybe that might be off-putting for some people. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth it, even if you just maybe you could recommend one of the stories to somebody who's like on the fence for the book. It might not work great, but maybe they're interested in the style.
Yeah, you could recommend, and then also like since they are different, you mentioned, you could even provide like the kind of just a heads up, this story you're not going to like as much, I think. So, get through that one, and I promise it gets better.
Out of these three stories, which one would you recommend people maybe don't start with?
Cassad.
Same.
I would recommend Cassad to a lot of people.
I
think general audiences, well, can I say like what Cassad's is about?
Sure, in general.
So Cassad's is...
It's like a space opera.
Sex and violence. And violence. And I think general audiences are really into sex and violence. So like, if I were to recommend this to somebody who I didn't know their taste, I might recommend that one first.
But would you say that's like representative of the series? Or
No.
or of the book at large? Like
There's different stories here. They're all very different. So, I mean...
Cassad's story might be the most different from the rest.
I would be inclined to agree with that, for sure.
I would say if I would avoid any of these three stories, and I don't think I would tell anybody to avoid any of them, it would be avoid Martin's story.
Oh, I'm offended.
He is like rude, he's abrasive, he is crass, he appeals to a lot of people, but he's also polarizing, I think.
Okay.
I see that. I really liked Martin's story, but like I understand that he is very like polarizing, and even the other pilgrims are kind of like, why is this guy here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think the consul kind of enjoys his presence, but
there's a lot of light characterization of the consul.
The consul is really hard to get a beat on, and
yes,
the consul is also my favorite character.
Same.
Okay, now that we're talking about specific characters, maybe let's go into spoiler territory. Listeners, this might be time to check out unless you've already read the first half of Hyperion. We're going to be discussing the first 3 chapters and the prologue. Give you some more time to run. And okay, let's start with a quick recap. We open with a prologue. The consul and his ship playing Rachmaninoff on a world of dinosaurs.
Oh, man.
Before he gets an urgent message from Maina Gladstone and returns to his duties in the hegemony. Next, we reconvene on the tree ship Yggdrasil and meet our pilgrims over dinner. After dessert, they vote to tell their tales to one another, and Father Lenar Hoyt tells the tale of Father Paul de Rey, the Bikura, and the cruciform. Afterward, we find that Hoyt has 2 cruciforms on his body and lives in constant pain. Next, our pilgrims land on Hyperion and encounter a city under civilian siege. After the consul rebuffs the governor-general, they visit a bar and meet an android who takes them upriver on the Benares, an ancient barge from Earth, where Cassad tells the tale of his slum upbringing, military career, mysterious romance, and Shrike encounter. Upon entering the destroyed port of Naiad, the barge must rest for a moment, where the poet Martin Silenus tells the story of how he escaped the dying earth to live through generations of time how he once lived on Hyperion in the time of Sad King Billy, and his own mysterious connection with the Shrike. So let's start with that opening where we meet our main character / narrator, the consul, playing an ancient Steinway in the nose of a spaceship on a planet uninhabited except for dinosaurs and him.
That's like such a cool intro, right? That's how I want to spend my life. I can't play the
Right?
piano, but like that's maybe the ideal situation.
Is a sweet retirement package.
And then when he gets the message from Gladstone, he thinks about it in a thunderstorm listening to Wagner.
Yes, he does. And he even pipes in the sound of the thunderstorm from the ship's external pickups into his bedroom, where he like has one arm over his eyes, so he just feels it in his. Oh my god, the console is so dramatic, and I love it.
And he has a tricorn hat.
A golden tricorn hat.
I love the intro because I think it's a lot of signaling to the reader that this story is going to be bonkers.
Oh, and he wears a blouse. I like that too.
I don't know what a blouse is. Is it just a shirt?
Just
It's
shut
like
it
a
up.
billowing shirt. It's a
Okay.
looser shirt. Yeah.
Or like a pirate shirt?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm imagining as a pirate. So
I mean, yeah.
He's not a pirate. Like he's even a captain of his own ship.
Yeah.
and works for the government.
And he's a pirate of information.
Oh yeah. He's got lots of secrets in his head,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
and discovering them one by one is one of the best parts of reading the book.
Yeah. Well, he drops like little lines in there, and you're like, "Wait, what? Do you talk about what
Little
you just
line.
said? What? I don't know. You had a family? What? Huh?"
One of my favorites by them is when he, just after this introduction, when he's meeting all of the other pilgrims on the tree ship, he's thinking about everybody telling their tales, and he has in his head the knowledge that at least one of the pilgrims is an ouster spy.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, maybe these tales will help me uncover the identity of the spy. And then he smiles to himself thinking, oh, wouldn't it be funny if any agent was that bad? Which is something that a lot of books they don't seem to have the presence of mind to understand that a spy wouldn't give themselves away in casual conversation that easily.
Yeah. Like a lot of books don't have like a concept of people actually being really competent at what they do.
Yeah. It's one of my criticisms of Dune is all of these people who are supposedly amazing at controlling their emotions and like never giving away a tell of what they're truly thinking are constantly doing that. They're constantly gasping and crying and like shuddering upon responses to just words that people are saying to them. And they're supposedly masters of espionage. I can't.
I assume you're referring to Dune the movie?
No, the books.
In the book.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, no, in the book.
Very good.
I'll keep an eye on that next time I read it.
Should we talk about Hoyt's story?
Nah, it's not really that important.
I think first let's go to initial impressions of all of the pilgrims as they're sitting around that dinner table talking about their plans and maybe the vote that they all took to decide to share their tales or not. Did anybody have thoughts about initial impressions of these pilgrims?
There is some very efficient characterization, but it's still very sparse generally.
Yes.
But yeah, you like get the sense that like all of these people are very famous people from different periods of the hegemony, and I find it interesting how I think it was Sol says that they're all basically islands unto themselves, not just in space but also time. They represent 7 different perspectives on the hegemony as a whole and on Hyperion specifically.
You're right. It is Sol who both says that and is the person to suggest that they all tell their stories.
More than characterization, I would say just an introduction of the archetypes that Dan Simmons would be going for, which is a way of characterization, I suppose, if you were expecting those kind of classifications.
Yep.
But I really enjoyed it.
We do get a few things right off the bat there. We get that Hetmastine is a Templar and that his people have both the tree ships, a reverence for John Muir, and they have a specific physiological makeup. They are tall, they are gangly, they have like a particular tone to their skin, which may or may not be diet related.
And the Templar religion has some connections to the Church of the Shrike, although Het Mastine himself condemns this.
Yes. And we also get the introduction of the high G planet Lucis, which Bron Lamia comes from, and her short, stocky, strong body is remarked upon.
Yeah. And her and Martin and maybe Cassad are like super easy to get a beat on. Like you get like 2 sentences of description of them, and instantly you know who they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you get the console's reactions to them as well. And I think one of my favorites, and it's almost a throwaway line, is that the console says, belatedly, after looking at Bron Lamia, he thinks to himself, she might be considered beautiful.
Yeah.
like she is what people might consider beautiful. And so we just get that extreme lack of sexual objectification from the console's point of view, which is in stark contrast to some characters who come up later.
It's also interesting because from the description of Lamia, I don't get the sense that she's very attractive. Like, she's like very short and like very stocky, and her
she has curly hair.
She does have curly hair and a sensuous mouth.
Yes.
With a smile.
I immediately think of her as like a dwarf. Like that, not this bad, like from like fantasy, right? So then everybody from this world in my brain is immediately like, oh, it's all like Gimli.
Yeah, that's fair.
In my head, she's like a curly-haired Mona Lisa.
Oh,
that's like 4.5 feet tall or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the Mona Lisa doesn't have a height in that painting.
I imagine a very muscular hobbit.
There you go.
Yeah,
sure.
Which is my style, so
there you go.
My type.
Nothing wrong with that. Okay. Anybody have any other notes about our Last Supper on the tree ship?
The only thing that I thought of is that I kind of wish that Lamia wasn't the only woman, because it's just a bunch of dudes and then her. But like, it's fine for the most part. Like, they play their roles, like you said, and they represent the galaxy. But like, if they really are representing, then I felt like there should have been like more women.
Yeah, I think like some of their stories, I don't think would have worked as well if they had been women. Like Father Hoyt, for example. Like, if this is the Catholic Church, like I guess it could have been Nun Hoyt, but I think that would have probably lost something.
The console could be.
But there are also characters that I think absolutely could have just been gender swapped with, like a lot of ease. Like the console, probably.
I don't know about the console.
Het Mastine?
Het Mastine could have. Het Mastine could have been gender swapped with no problem.
Het Mastine is a bit of a special case, I think.
Uh,
We'll have to get into that later.
But we haven't talked really much about, and for good reason, the character of Maina Gladstone, who is the person who wakes up the console. In fact, the second character introduced in the story.
True.
Yeah.
Should we talk about her yet?
Isn't she like compared to Lincoln?
Yeah, she's compared to Lincoln and like Alvarez Temp and Churchill.
See, I imagine Angela Merkel.
Yeah, that's what I imagine too. I'm more of a Merkel.
I sort of, but also Angela Merkel isn't like the most charismatic of people, whereas like people like Lincoln and Churchill very much were, despite all their other faults.
Also in 1990, Angela Merkel was not nearly as historic.
It's true.
True.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at this from now, so
there's a certain distance of time that hasn't occurred yet.
Yeah.
When I think about those things, I don't really put myself into 1999's perspective, if that makes sense. Like, I don't imagine what the author is trying to put. I just imagine what I imagine, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense.
I did like that one of the comparisons that they used in that instance was a future person who hasn't occurred yet. So we already are building up the mythology of this world just by comparing one character to 3 other characters, one of whom is fictional.
Yeah.
Simmons does that throughout all the stories.
Yeah. It's highly efficient.
I hate it when there's like a future story and all of the references are to modern society or things that happened before modern society. It's like the most lazy way you can write a book if you're doing sci-fi.
Not only that, like a lot of the references they make are to just problems that still exist today, but seem to have another, like they talked about the other Palestinian war or the third Sino-Japanese war.
Yes.
Or these things that just do not get better.
Indo-Soviet limited exchange.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like a nuclear
Or like
jihad of
the second
2038.
prosperity sphere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
Which goes back to the tale of the Benares, because that's when those were mentioned, right?
Yeah, a lot of them, yeah.
A few of the people didn't recognize the name of the ship Benares as an actual city on Old Earth. And who was it? I think it was Bron Lamia who ran down the history of that city, the names it had been under, the wars and expansionary efforts and political systems it had been a part of or involved in or proximal to. And none of that has any reference to actual real life politics or wars or anything.
That's true. And then Martin said he got mugged there.
Yeah.
There's also the bar Cicero, which they speculate was named after Chicago.
Yes. But no one knows except the grandson, like the great-grandson.
And he won't tell anybody.
No.
Cicero was a famous Roman orator, one of the most famous speakers, I think, of all time, just in case you didn't know.
But the bar is specifically not named after him. It's named after something else which does not have the name Cicero.
Yeah.
Gotta love that. But yeah, as far as Islands of Time go, I think the Benares might actually predate all of the Pilgrims.
It depends on if it was built during Martin Silenus's time or not.
I think Martin Silenus's time was after most people had left Earth already, right?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the Benares was built before Martin Silenus. Even though he is almost incomprehensibly ancient, the ship is older still.
Is that what the significance is supposed to be? Because that's the question that I actually asked. I was wondering about. It's like, why did they bring this thing from Old Earth, and why is it named after this Old Earth city? Like, how does that connect to the Pilgrims and everything happening?
Do you want my opinion on that?
Sure. I mean, that's fine. I just want to know what people are thinking.
I think it's commentary on the fact that even though human life may be extended and stretched far beyond what people would have once thought possible, it's still true that the objects of humanity, its artifacts and institutions and cultural baggage, will last long beyond any one individual.
Okay.
Yeah. We also get a lot of ancient stuff in these books. Like the Catholic Church is featured prominently in Hoyt's story, as well as the cathedral that he goes down into. We meet Cassad at the Battle of Agincourt.
Yes.
And Martin Silenus is from Earth himself and is from an ancient aristocracy, no less.
Yeah.
And nobody knows how old the labyrinths are.
Yeah.
Do you guys, speaking about that, it's a piece of world building in that there's effectively no aliens in this world. Just humans and the AIs that they built.
Uh-huh.
How do you guys
What
feel
about
about that? The Shrike is an anomaly that is undefined if it's alien or god or...
They never really define that, does he?
Definitely not in these 3 chapters.
Not in these chapters. Okay, all right.
I used to hate it when sci-fi stories didn't include alien races, alien species. Now, I kind of like it when there's only humans and there's like a complex thing going on there, because a lot of the time when sci-fi writers invent species, they just invent humans with a different hat on, and that frustrates me to no end.
Yeah.
We gotta get you to read Startide.
Yeah, Startide's quite different.
There are a lot of authors that do alien, like true alien species very well, but I think the majority just, I took this 20th century capitalist and put some forehead on him and called him the Ferengi.
Hey, but Star Trek is fun and great.
I would like to see an alien race that's literally just humans with hats. Like they can't take their hats off. Or it's like a part of their...
I feel like there's a Dr. Seuss story that's pretty similar.
He's ahead of our time. Shall we move on to the stories instead of world building?
Yeah, let's go into the stories.
Yeah, let's go stories.
Let's start off with Father Paul de Rey and Father Lenar Hoyt, the priest's tale. I don't even know how to start here. We start with a disgraced priest leaving the Catholic world of Pachem because he'd attempted to falsify archaeological reports, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he decides to begin an ethnological study of a band of humans who survived a dropship crash 450 years ago on Hyperion.
Mm-hmm. And were described as too boring to be worth writing about.
And to get there, he had to travel by boat and then by zeppelin or dirigible, sorry. Dirigible and then by boat again.
And then through a forest.
Through
jungle.
the flame forest. Through a jungle and
Awesome.
then through the flame forest. Which is, yes, awesome. These big onion domed Tesla trees, the Bestis fireproof plants, the phoenix ferns, and all these other pieces of flora which survive only in extreme environment.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys like that on its own, or is it just a really cool backdrop?
I really liked it, and it's very fitting for a Catholic story. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I have very mixed feelings on the Catholic Church. And these kinds of stories are, I think, excellent for describing, I think, the complicated relationship that the Catholic Church has with essentially the world. It's like an ancient institution that was incredibly valuable and has sort of like a checkered past, but also has this incredible iconography and symbology that like has been incredibly compelling to millions of people over the years.
So were you slightly excited when in their reconstruction of St. Peter's Basilica, they've only ever had like 5,000 people max, even though it can hold 10 times that number?
I thought it was kind of sad.
Okay, yeah. I think sad is what they were going for.
This old giant problem.
I was very sad. Have you seen St. Peter's Basilica?
I've been there, yeah.
It's gorgeous, yeah.
It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And I couldn't imagine only 5,000 people there.
I mean, I prefer Sagrada Familia, but whatever.
That one's nice too. Yeah, St. Peter's is still better.
La Sagrada doesn't have the Pieta, that's true.
And that one's not finished.
It's mostly finished.
Won't be finished for like, what, a decade? 5
They
years?
declared it finished, but they keep doing work on it.
Considering that like how long most of these cathedrals took to get built, like a decade's not that long.
They've been working on it a long time.
Hyperion was actually where I first learned of Saint Teilhard, and I was wondering if anybody who, probably Ash, who understands that little bit of Christian doctrine, had thoughts about making a follower of Saint Teilhard de Chardin one of the primary protagonists.
I was raised in a non-denominational church that had almost no respect for saints. So
Okay.
I did not learn about any of them besides sort of Martin Luther.
The place I was raised in, they didn't hate Catholics by any means, but they saw their worship in quotes as saints as heretical, maybe
Pagan.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah,
Unorthodox. Yeah. Idolatry, probably.
Bordering. Yeah.
It's really common, though, because I was raised Catholic. So, like, we have like a billion saints. I remember growing up, my mom would be like, oh, yeah, pray to St. Peter or like pray to St. Francis when you can't find something. Or I couldn't remember specific. I can't put them together in that place anymore. And I mean, it does. I think it's fitting that he uses that because there is like a saint for like a specific situation. So you can kind of latch onto that in like a story like this, and then you can use that to kind of direct like what your intention is or what you're trying to get the reader to like get out of a story.
Saint Teilhard was one of the saints who tried to reconcile reason with faith and tried to construct an overarching like scientific theory which would explain both religion and the natural world. And I think that's very important in the Hyperion Cantos.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that. Wish I know about this guy.
Yeah.
Religion plays a very interesting part in these books. Specifically, so there's the Zen Gnosticism, which is the most popular religion, which is kind of like a blend of everything.
It's pretty fun.
And there's like the Church of the Shrike, who worship essentially a death god.
Pain god as well.
But it's the Catholic Church and the Jewish faith that interest me the most, because there's very much this feeling that their time is past and that they were kind of softly disproven, so people just don't bother with them anymore. And for Father Paul Dura, he himself is like a very complicated relationship with his faith, and like he's not in a good place with it. I think it's fair to say at the start of the story. He just kind of goes back and forth, and that kind of struggle, I think, is something that like nearly everybody can relate to. I think it's explored very well through all these metaphors.
There's actually what you're talking about. One of the quotes that I picked up. Is it all right if I read real quick just the short first sentence of the quote?
Go ahead.
All right, so he said, I realize now that what I was trying to do with the Armagas data was offer the church not a rebirth, but only a transition to a false life, such as these poor walking corpses inhabit.
Good. Yeah, it's good stuff.
I have that highlighted.
Yeah.
I think that can be interpreted even outside of religion, especially outside of religion. Whenever you have like something that you really, really, really believe in and want to support, at a certain point, like before you even know it, you kind of just hope that you can, I want to say, convince other people, even if it's not entirely true, that you could get them to be on your side, and like maybe even if it's a small lie, then they could see the real truth behind it, if that makes sense.
It's like when you're debating, if you just happen to omit all of the stuff that disproves your position and only
Exactly,
mention the
yeah.
stuff that
Yeah.
puts it forward. Yeah.
You're like, all that stuff's not important. The important part is the part I'm talking about. And yeah, that stuff, if you look at it a certain way, then it might not be so good, but just ignore that. So it's hard. You got to look at it. It's hard to be self-reflecting and like challenge yourself like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Paul DeRay had definitely lost his faith and was struggling to find it both for the world at large, but also just for himself. And eventually he did find it again. It was not maybe under the best of circumstances, but he did find it again. And he came to realize, and I'm going to read a quote that came right after what Dusty said. It must go into the darkness not willingly but well, bravely and firm of faith, like the millions who have gone before us, keeping faith with all those generations facing death in the isolated silence of death camps and nuclear fireballs and cancer wards and pogroms. Going into the darkness, if not hopefully, then prayerfully that there is some reason for it all, something worth the price of all that pain, all those sacrifices. It's very rage against the dying of the light.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's an interesting, his progression. He goes from very much having lost his faith to regaining his faith, and then his faith gets sort of recontextualized in a way where like faith alone seems to be enough for him at the end. Before this, he needed to find evidence, but the Bakura and stuff, like I think he probably realized at the end that doesn't seem like it would be the work of a loving God.
No, not really. He wanted to die the true death, and so he crucified himself for 7 years.
And was purified through fire.
And martyrized
and lightning.
Well, you said the cruciform, is that an alien?
I mean, we have no idea what the cruciform is, but it's definitely not like a Ferengi.
It is definitely not a Ferengi, yeah.
No, I thought it was more like the way that even now they're talking about it. It seems like a construct, like less like an alien life form, like something that was built with an intention.
I got that impression as well.
I'm sympathetic to that view, largely because of the labyrinth and also the cathedral itself. It's like clearly not a natural structure, and the cruciforms were all placed in there, and they don't seem to occur elsewhere on Hyperion.
The cruciforms weren't in the cathedral. They weren't in the basilica. They were much further down in the labyrinth.
Oh, yeah.
I've forgotten the later books. Do we ever receive an explanation for the labyrinth?
Let's say yes.
Second story?
Well, we haven't talked about the Bakura at all.
We didn't.
We have not talked about the Bakura at all, and honestly, I'm not entirely sure I care to. Other than that, there is a just real offhanded mention about the dangers of generation ships and how he basically calls what happened to the Bakura their mental retardation, their other physical, what do you call that? Their physical regression and what looks like inbreeding, that is a classic sign of generation ship sickness. And I'm always here for critiquing the model of generation ships as a method of propagating life into the stars.
I thought that the Bakura are like one of the most horrifying things that I've ever read. And like the fate of Father Paul Dura was yikes. Like is it just me, or does this seem like the worst possible thing that could befall you? essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's worse things.
like
It's
being put
kind
on
of
this
like-
Shrike's wall.
Yeah, like the Tree of Pain doesn't sound great.
Well, like this is like you lose every part of yourself, and it's not like so much that you regress as like everything is smoothed over and you're left with nothing of yourself. Kind of, it's kind of like an extreme form of Alzheimer's in that way. It's just
I would say that I'm not there anymore.
Yeah.
I died.
It's less about how we feel in that, and it's more as the reader, we look at that and like, oh, that's horrifying. But if we're in their shoes, we don't know that it's horrifying.
at the one end of it, yes, but throughout your deaths and rebirths, like if you're smart like Father Paul, you get to be aware of what's happening
At the start.
and who knows when it ends.
I do view it very much as like a form of Alzheimer's, just extended.
I have a question for y'all. Do you view Paul Durace's section, and specifically the portrayal of the Bikuri, as a criticism of religion in general? Because it seems
No.
like these people, they take on the cruciform and they become brain dead and lifeless.
I do not. No.
Why?
Because we don't have any information about how they became the 70. They got crash landed there and something gave them the cruciform, but it's not clear if it was their choice, if it was something that they were driven to do in extremis. It's not clear about how it happened originally, and it's not clear about how much like volition they had in it.
I interpret it as people taking on extremism in their religious beliefs, maybe like a cult or something. Maybe I'm torn on Duray's part. I don't think it's actually in general a criticism of religion, but I do think it's a really good meditation on the goods and bads.
Sure, a meditation on yes.
Yeah, and I guess they do murder everyone that's not one of them by holding them down and cutting their throat with sharp rocks until they bleed out and their heart stops.
Yes. It's definitely commentary on religion, but I wouldn't call it a negative critique on religion. I wouldn't say that it says that, like, for example, religion is something that dumbs you down until you just follow commands blindly.
And the ending of the story, at first it seems hopeful, and then there's this kind of crushing realization that not only is Hoyt infected with the cruciform, but he has Paul's cruciform on his back. So Paul hasn't escaped, basically. He went through all of that probably for nothing.
I think there's a distinction to be drawn there. I do think that it's definitely not completely over for Paul, but it is at least partially over in that the instantiation of Paul in his body died. That instance of Paul died. Sure, the cruciform might have made some sort of copy of him that now lives on separately in Father Lenore Hoyt's body, but I think the original died.
Okay, so, oh boy. Yeah.
Let's not get into that.
I tend to agree, but I think this is a discussion that needs to wait. And I think you'll understand why.
Whatever. I'm just going off what I read.
I also thought of this as like metaphorically, it's kind of like the generational burden, like passing it on, like, oh, okay, our generation like messed this up or like had this, but we'll just give it to the next generation. And that's kind of what Hoyt picked up, right? So he's like, okay, I got an extra burden because of this situation.
Is this not just the Theseus' ship dilemma?
I mean, yeah, it is. It's tightly interwoven with Theseus' ship.
Okay, well, let's just not get into that then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we move on to Fedman Kassad?
Yeah.
Sure. But first, actually, let's go to the in-between section where they arrive at Keats spaceport and they get greeted by Theo. Fedman Kassad gets recognized by the like guy who's being an officious something to the group, and a small man who has become inflamed by the small amount of power he happens to hold at the moment, I think was the quote, something like that. And then they go to Cicero's.
Also, the consul refuses a request to assume the governorship of the planet.
Yes, Governor General. Because he can't. And we as readers are like, why? Why is he so intent on this pilgrimage that he just learned about? That he's still recovering from cryogenic fuga?
And he really didn't seem enthusiastic when he got the call from Gladstone.
No, he had to go through a whole Wagner interlude before he decided to blast off. I enjoyed the like really fast moments of characterization that we got about Keats, that we got about the spaceport, and now we finally understand like why you can't just land the ship wherever you want, and it's because fusion flame is a pretty hot thing. It needs to be doused with jets of pressurized water.
Mm-hmm. And we learned that Martin had a connection with Sad King Billy, and he quotes Shakespeare.
Yes, Sad King Billy, whose like dour countenance is looking down on them from the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And who is it that thinks? Oh, it's not as it was. It was Father Duray who was like, it's not as pretty as I thought it was going to be. It looks kind of like a rush job.
Yeah, he was very critical of the city of Keats, and
Yep.
based on the description that Martin has, I wonder if it's just that the city has degraded since the time of Sad King Billy.
There's like this dichotomy in the city, right? There's the old city, which is all clean lines and stone, but kind of overly sterile. And then there's Jacktown, which is this sprawling slum, which has just engulfed the whole place. And the spaceport is now practically within Jacktown, even though it used to be well outside of it. You know, the classic thing of you build the airport outside the city and then the city swallows it up.
Yep.
Keats reminded me of a city from Wheel of Time.
What city from Wheel of Time?
Gerhard?
Okay.
I don't know how to pronounce that one right.
Yep.
Kyrian, I think it's
Hyperion, yeah.
Kyrian.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one that definitely talks about how the city just kind of keeps on building and they need to build new walls as they go along. Layers of expansion. Also, Andor did that, but Andor was better about keeping things organized.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Andor and
Okay.
Camelot. Oh, sorry, I meant Camelin.
Sure. Now we can go into Kassad's tale.
Sex and violence.
Sex
Sex and
There you go.
violence.
That's Kassad's tale.
Grew up in the slums and got conscripted / volunteered for the fight. Distinguished himself, got himself some training, and killed a lot of people.
Killed a lot of people.
Yeah. Some of his story parts are really really cool though. I mean cool, but like reading about how he initially got kind of famous on what was the name of the world that's like Islamic?
Qom, I think.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I knew what was coming and I was like, oh man, this is gonna be wild. Like I was like ready for it. I was like, this is gonna be so cool. In the back of my mind, I'm also like, this is horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to my housemate when I was reading that section. I was like, oh, the protagonist in this section just killed 15,000 people.
Mm-hmm. But it was brilliant.
With X-rays.
Yes.
With x-rays, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
On live television.
Live television. I have like a small nitpick in that the Battle of Agincourt seems to, like, Dan Simmons doesn't seem to understand how it went down.
Or is it that Force Space doesn't seem to understand how it went down?
Yeah.
You know, it could be either. You know, they just have really bad historical data and a bad simulation.
Well, because they basically said that, like in the midst of it, it proved that longbows were the ultimate winner, right?
Yeah.
It talked about the transformative power of being able to use conscripts as effective tools of battle and not have to like extensively train people.
Right.
And also like not having to use nobles as your major force in war.
Yeah. The real winner of the real thing that caused them to win Agincourt was like the terrain, basically. He didn't mention the mud at all, which made me sad, because essentially the knights were drowning in mud, and that's why they lost.
Okay.
Although the longbows definitely helped a lot, and like that was a turning point, absolutely.
He was off in the forest having sex. He didn't notice.
Yeah, he forgot about all that stuff. He is busy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I can't blame him. If I got to choose between shooting a longbow at a bunch of knights and having sex in the forest, I would definitely choose the latter.
I'm into that.
You say sex and violence, but like they really are right next to each other in Kassad's chapters. Like they happen
Yes.
at the exact same time.
Yeah, they have sex next
Yeah.
to the dead corpse of the Frenchman they just killed.
Yeah. It's
And they
bloodlust.
describe like the blood is like all over their skin while they're having
Mhm.
sex. Ugh.
Yeah.
That's pretty accurate, I think.
I think they also described her impaling, him impaling her, which fits the metaphor.
Well, and
Yeah.
then she impales him later.
Almost.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, there's some things that go on there.
I think
How
the first
much
time I
do we
read
have
it,
to talk about the bloodlust?
I think it's an important part.
Very.
Okay.
The first time I read it, I did Kassad's part it was not my favorite, but like I enjoyed it. This time I didn't really like it.
Same.
It's a small part at the end of his story, but it tells what he did after his time on Hyperion, his battle on Hyperion, and how he became an anti-war activist,
Mm-hmm.
and how no one believed him, and then he just kind of like faded into insignificance after a few debates on the all thing.
Yeah.
No one cared. They thought it was just a guilty conscience from the butcher of South Brescia.
Yeah, he essentially becomes a World War I general at the Battle of South Brescia, which is interesting. I also find the Code of New Bushido getting introduced and then almost immediately discarded to be kind of funny.
Bushido.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Huron, tell us about the Bushido Code.
Bushido Code's bullshit. You can't spell bullshit without Bushido, or the other way around.
Oh.
So, no, like the idea of Bushido was basically created in the late 1900s as a way to, I don't know, impress foreigners and prove that the Japanese had some sort of code by which they live by. It was first written in English for American audiences to prove that the Japanese are, I don't know, not savages, right?
That's a great sign.
But the fact is, before the late 1900s, nobody knew the word Bushido. Nobody followed the word Bushido. And especially during the high point of the samurai times, Bushido was not a thing. And people didn't follow it, and it was ridiculous.
Wasn't it during the Meiji Restoration that like the Japanese government was like, "Oh, let's venerate the samurai"?
Yep, after they took away all of their money and land, and
Yeah.
Killed him.
it was actually it was after the restoration, really, when they were trying to inspire it's fine, not important.
So yeah, it seems like New Bushido is this idea of small, limited engagements with equivalent forces on prescribed terrain, with essentially like battles for conditions,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure. Uh-huh.
And we have one person, or three people really, with Moneta, Kassad, and the Shrike take out an entire ouster force group. And you start to think, wait, how often are the levels of technology equivalent in the world web and hegemony?
Or even outside.
Or even outside in the ousters?
Yeah.
Like, how often are they actually technologically equivalent? And is there any meaningful way for Bushido to apply, even this new Bushido that they've invented out of whole cloth?
The new Bushido is basically written for the hegemony because like they understand that minus the ousters, most of the people they'll be fighting will be either rebels or like small outposts or something. So they're basically writing it saying like everybody fighting our rule because we know at the end of the day we're going to win with our superior forces.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I really like the idea of returning to non-total war. That would be awesome, but I think it is entirely unfeasible unless you're in a situation where you have a hegemony, who can just kind of dictate these things.
You have a Gemini, and you have all of their opponents who are lesser.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't become Bushido. In my mind, if you have a hegemony and lesser opponents, then it becomes they have to use like terrorism or like other tactics that we would define as terrorism as the hegemony.
That's essentially what the ousters did when they invaded Brescia. They used not just military force that overwhelmed Brescia, but they also used asymmetrical warfare and total warfare techniques against the hegemony, which the hegemony was not prepared for.
Yep.
And we get hints that New Bushido hasn't broken before. First, the situation with Kassad, and then this strange guerrilla warfare on Maui Covenant.
Yes. We get little hints of that. Though the Maui Covenant thing, of course, was over with quickly. as
Yeah.
Kassad remarks. Barely worth mentioning to Kassad.
Barely worth mentioning. Oh,
Barely.
man.
Barely. Are we about done with Kassad, and can we skip over all talk of the dentata?
Sure. I
The
don't
what?
think it really had much relevance anyways, right?
No, I think it's just thrown in for more body horror.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So now we're at the destroyed port of Naiad. There are no more mantas to hook up to the boat to pull it along the canals, so they have to push their own mantas further and probably kill them. Anyone find any symbolism in that?
No. None.
No, none. Great.
Yeah. I don't believe in symbols. The curtains are red. Or blue.
It's my religion. I don't worship symbols.
No, nothing.
That was a.
Why don't you tell us what you thought was the symbol behind that tip?
No, I'm done. I don't need to talk about the symbolism of treating lower life forms like they don't matter to you as long as they fulfill their purpose. I don't need to talk about that.
Yeah, because there's none there. There's nothing meaningful to be said, I think.
Sure, let's
We'll wait
return
for
to this
half
in
an
a
hour.
later book. Third tale, Poet's Tale. With almost no preamble this time. Just the entire section of the chapter, pretty much, is the Poet's Tale.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good.
This is by far my favorite.
This is not my favorite.
What I like.
It's not your favorite of the three or of the whole book?
Both.
Yeah, he likes Paul Deray's, right?
Yeah, I like Hoyt's story, and I like the consul's story the most.
Oh, really? Okay.
Later.
Yeah, the consul story is my favorite, but you save the best for last, and so shall we.
Part of why I didn't like Kassad's is because the prose was just so prosaic. I've been waiting to say that. And
I love it.
I'm sure Craig will enjoy.
Part of why I didn't like Deray's as much is because it was
epistolary.
Thank you. And I really, really I love Deray's story. But Silenus's way of telling a story and how narrative it is, and then how hilarious he is, and how poetical it is just like the perfect fit for my taste.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that sometimes he had some lines that I was like, I literally had to stop and think about it, and I was like, wow, that's really deep coming from this guy. And then he had other lines that I just couldn't stop laughing.
He's undeniably the most lively of the characters, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
He is also, I would say, the most unhinged. Yeah.
Absolutely insane. But also, in a way, like the most representative of humanity.
Oh, that's I'm not sure if I could agree with that, but I would need to. I'll think about it.
He's lived so many lives.
He has, and
I agree with Kip.
His different lives have taken such different forms as well. Like he lived in the peak of luxury, essentially, and then he went all the way to the bottom. And then he got pretty close to the top again, and then he went towards the middle, and then he transformed himself to a satyr.
I like how pretty close to the top is best-selling author.
Yeah.
Right.
What, 3 billion copies sold?
Yeah.
You get the sense that Dan Simmons has a real bone to pick with the publishing industry.
Yeah, he does not paint publishers in the most flattering light at all.
Mm-hmm.
I love later after he became a hack, and he was talking about how he'd hang out with his writer friends, and they would all internally think that they were the real artists and that the other ones were hacks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very much so. Just like all those sections, he's pointing fingers, and I'm wondering about if I was an author or publisher reading these books, like would I feel anything, or I'd just be like, who gives a crap?
Well, the thing about being a sociopath is you don't have to care.
Yeah, you don't have to care as long as it sells. That's all you care about.
Yeah.
And you know what? He had one project that sold and one that didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And the Technicore really liked the second one.
They bought one copy.
And one shared it against a million AIs. That was so funny.
They bought one copy. Because I do have 3 Malazan fans on the podcast. How do you guys feel about that as compared to Steven Erikson and his newer trilogies?
I think it's very apt when he writes a good book for once and then it doesn't sell. I think that's the case with a lot of really, really good art. Steve, I think, is very cognizant of this and has just accepted it. And I think he's
Literally what he told us.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
He's,
His audience of 38 people.
he's
63.
68 or something, like 67.
63 people. Okay.
But yeah, like he's accepted this, and he doesn't resent other other authors' success like Martin seems to. Like you can be dissatisfied with the way things are without like wanting to tear everyone else down secretly in your heart.
I think the Silent sections were pretty. I obviously don't know anything about publishing, but it felt real because I don't know. I think when an author has a big enough audience, they will sometimes publish things that they know won't sell just to make them happy.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I'd like to note is that this is our first section of the book where we really start to learn what the world web is and what a farcaster is.
Yeah.
Yes.
We haven't seen any of that prior, even though they've been mentioned a billion times. We haven't really seen people farcast yet. We've seen some ships farcast in Colonel Kassad's case with the jump ship, but we haven't really seen, for example, the farcaster homes.
Yeah, because like Sol noted, like most of them didn't really use that kind of thing. Martin probably used them more than everyone else put together by quite a margin.
Oh yeah, he has 38 planets or something in his home.
Oh man,
something like that. 38 planets and like 35 rooms. Because like, how did they? No, was it the other way around? No, there are more rooms than planets. Because a couple
more rooms than planets. Yeah.
Yeah, how would you have that? Well, you could have a farcaster in the middle of your room, I guess.
You could have a window, I guess.
Room, yeah.
Did you guys like his bathroom?
Oh my gosh. I don't get it. Like, so it's just on pontoons or something and it floats in this violent sea world?
Yep.
How do you not make a mess every time you go to the bathroom? That was my brain. Like,
it's just on it's a raft. It's a raft.
And he probably does make a mess. He's Martin. He doesn't seem bothered by the concept. I think he's probably the least sympathetic character.
Yeah.
Because sure.
Yeah, it's really hard to like get on the guy's side.
Hard to love a hedonist.
Yeah, when he's so directly self-sabotaging, it can get very frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really test the piety and the good-hearted nature of some of the other pilgrims with Martin Selenius.
Yes.
Well, yeah, because even at the end of like, we get to the point where he's writing about the strike. Is it okay if I jump to this? Is that too soon?
Sure. No, go ahead.
And King Billy shows up and he reads his Cantos and he's like, you need to destroy this. This is all your fault. But Martin is very much like, nah, man.
No.
This is what we all deserve, and this is what is going to happen, and this is my muse, so get out of here.
That is
an accurate retelling.
A neutral evil reaction.
Yeah.
A deeply solipsistic reaction.
Yeah, he just doesn't care about other people, it seems.
All that matters to him is his art. That's it.
He's a very extreme artist in that way. I really liked King Billy, though. King Billy did not deserve what happened to him.
No,
agreed.
I mean, he decided to make an artist commune, so I think he did.
What? I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
I would love to have an artist commune.
If it wasn't for Martin, everyone would have been fine, right?
If it wasn't for the strike, everything would be fine.
Yeah.
I know of a couple artist communes in Boston and a couple former artist communes in Boston that burned down.
Oh.
Ouch.
That's unfortunate.
So really, I think his insurance adjuster should have told him the risk.
It's like he had like the noblest ambitions possible, and he was almost exactly Plato's philosopher king, living in a city of enlightened people. And
though one thing we do have to mention is how it was built.
Oh, was it Android?
Droids were created for the purpose and then kind of just discarded from that purpose.
Yeah, Plato was fine with slavery.
Noblest of ambitions.
If you don't consider androids to be like creatures with feelings, then it's fine, right? But
we can get into that later.
If you don't consider mantas to be creatures with feelings, that's fine.
Yeah. And I think the extent to which that is a moral failing is very debatable. And fittingly, it has been debated a lot.
I will say it is not unexplored in this work.
Yeah.
Yes.
And of course, the city is named Keats after the, quote, purest poet. Which I think is really interesting because Keats died of tuberculosis very early and thought he was never going to be remembered.
Yeah.
Well, he also, like, at the end of his life, when he was dying of tuberculosis too, he's kind of had a moment of like, well, I've done this all wrong. Like, I was happy. I could have been happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he had a moment of self-doubt at the end while being attended by his faithful friend Joseph Severn. And definitely no homoeroticism there either.
No, get your homoeroticism out of my 90s sci-fi kit.
Sure, I'll try. It's just everywhere, though.
Can we talk about how funny this section is?
Yes.
It's pretty funny, yeah.
It's like, this is literally one of the funniest things. I'll share my story here, but in our DMs, I was out and about while I was reading this, standing in lines and whatnot, and I could not stop laughing for like 5 minutes straight during some of the sections. And it was very embarrassing for my wife, and I could honestly say this is one of the funniest things I've ever read.
Yeah, it's especially when he has a limited vocabulary.
The brand of humor does seem right up your alley.
I should read it, and you could just beep everything out.
Bleep all of it.
Yeah, I have to believe the whole section. Yeah, because it only knows the 9 or 6 words.
Well, I got this really good section here that has actually no curse words in it.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
I think I know which one it is.
Oh, okay. Can I read it then?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm good with the bleeping.
The very beginning, I'll have to bleep out. Pee-pee and poo-poo. A quick analysis will show some redundancy here. I had at my disposal 8 nouns, which stood for 6 things. 5 of the 8 nouns could double as verbs. I retain 1 indisputable noun and a single adjective, which also could be used as a verb or expletive. My new language universe was comprised of 4 monosyllables, 3 compound words, and 2 baby talk repetitions. My arena of literal expressions offered 4 avenues to the topic of illumination. 2 references to human anatomy, 1 request for divine 1 standard description of request for coitus, and a coital variation which was no longer an option for me since my mother was deceased. All in all, it was enough.
And that's the funniest Dan Simmons ever got.
Yes.
It's true. It's true. The Poet's Tale has the funniest bits of Dan Simmons ever. It's true.
Mm-hmm.
I've never read any other stuff.
Don't.
I like
Hyperion.
Abominable.
So I gotta.
The Ilium Olympos series is not worth reading.
No, I read Ilium and I will not finish Olympos.
Good.
Anyways,
Okay.
back to the funny stuff.
Back to Martin Selenius, our favorite satyr. If you guys had Martin Selenius money, what would you have done?
Something productive, right? Like, okay, I'm going to assume that he had, I don't know, let's say like $1 billion. That seems like enough. I would give away almost all of it, almost immediately, and sort of live comfortably off the rest with enough to buy like as many miniatures as I wanted and all the paints I could desire and a house. And that's probably it.
I would fund a Malazan adaptation and then probably give it a charity.
Yeah. I would get Denis Villeneuve and be like, here, I'll give you $500 million. Read Malazan, put together a team, and come back to me with the best you got. And I don't know, maybe take another $500 million.
I don't know if I just give it away. I always think about this. If I was super rich, I would use the money to make more money, and then with the money that I make off of the money, I would use it for things because it would be like a continuous income. Because I don't know if you're an author like him and you have this one bit of, oh, I wrote something great, and then the next thing I wrote, nobody liked it. I would probably, I would use the money to continue it, and then just kind of give up on the weird, like, The Dying Earth Part 75.
I got Mr. Forward Thinker over here.
Oops.
Yeah, look at Mr. Non-Author.
Also non-football player.
Non-poet mindset. Okay, cool. So I think we've mostly done things, so we can do a quick wrap up.
First of all, what was the point of Martin being a satyr? Like, he gets the operation done, has it for like a page, and then gets it undone.
Yeah.
This is the least satisfying storytelling possible, I think.
It was longer than a page.
It was not long, and most of the point of it was just so he could have sex with more people.
I mean,
I think that is a wonderful piece of insight into his character.
He's a hedonist.
He is a non-forward-thinking hedonist.
Wait,
Fair.
He does things on a whim, and he doesn't always think them through, and sometimes he works contrary to his own desires without knowing it.
Mm-hmm.
I also, just jumping into really quickly, do you think he actually controlled the Shrike, or do you think it was just a coincidence?
I think that his brain made subconscious leaps, and he intuited what was going to happen, essentially, because he was sort of in phase in thinking with the what was going to happen, probably in large part due to his brain damage and subsequent brain reconstruction.
Okay.
I
think
agree.
that's a good interpretation. And maybe it has something to do with being on Hyperion in general and being near the time.
I think he was connected but not controlling.
Mhm.
Okay, that makes sense.
Maybe influencing or affecting, but not controlling. Like maybe the Shrike found their connection interesting enough to like do what was written. Or maybe he found it interesting enough to like put it into Martin's head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He read his stuff and was like, yo, that's a really good idea. I'll steal it for my own work. Yeah, it would be really cool if that happened.
But some sort of little connection.
Okay.
But so far, everyone's had some sort of connection to the Shrike.
Mhm.
So
We'll see where it takes us.
the 7 are coming together, and we'll see where it takes us. Anything else people want to get out before we end this episode?
I'm excited for the second half because the second half, with the exception of Lamia's story, is, I think, much better.
Okay.
It's great.
Mhm.
I especially like Lamia's story.
I don't remember it so well.
I like Lamia's, and I really like 2 others, and the other one, whatever.
I don't remember
Yeah.
all the ones.
Silenus
I
is
remember
my favorite in the
Souls.
book.
There
Whose?
is a specific aspect of Lamia's story that I really, really, really do like, though, I will say.
Okay.
Next
Alright.
episode.
Next episode.
Next episode.
Next episode. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you Craig for loaning us this corner of his medium empire. Thank you Horizon Brave for getting things started. Our intro and outro music is performed by Jingle Punks. The song is Galactic Damages. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
So long.
Bye-bye.
I'll see
Adios.
you all adjourn.
Thanks for all the fish.
And if you hate what we said, come talk to us on Discord.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that sounds
please.
good.